Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer. Let's talk about the full moon in Taurus. Before I start to unpack that, I just want to take a moment to pay my respects to a gentleman by the name of Nick Anthony Fiorenza. I'm looking because I don't want to mispronounce the name. He's an astrologer who I only recently came to know of his work in the last couple of years, and he transcended this world. I think it was just yesterday, early hours of yesterday morning. So I'd like to pay my respects to his family members and his friends. And for those of you that don't know him, I suggest you check out just the few videos that he's put out on YouTube. He's a wonderful, I suppose you could say, graphic designer of the cosmos, the night sky. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Let me just share my screen and just show you a beautiful example of his work. So this was a visual that he created relative to Venus retrograde earlier this year. So what I'll do is I'll just enlarge the screen. We won't watch the whole thing. It only goes for 2 minutes anyway, but there's a bit of sound there. So I don't know how clearly you can see this. Hopefully you can see it quite clearly, but here's some of the beautiful work that this man created, this soul created for us. He had a very, just a very succinct understanding about the synodic cycles of all the planets, and he created these beautiful visuals and graphics. There's Venus, for instance. He's showing us the movement of Venus. That line, that horizontal line there, is the ecliptic, which is the sun's pathway, right? These are all fixed stars, and it's quite loud, isn't it? And so on and so forth. So you can have a look at this yourself. I just wanted to pay my respects, basically. Okay, so it's a, you know, it's always, obviously it's always a loss, you know, when we lose somebody. And even though I didn't even know this man, you know, but I felt, yeah, I just felt a great sense of deep loss when I heard he was unwell a few weeks ago, and it was obvious it was heading in that direction. Anyway, I just wanted to pay my respects and also introduce his work. If you're not aware of him, you can learn a lot about the map of the celestial sphere, the sky, and the cycles and the planets, and just visually seeing the movements, how everything moves. He was just brilliant. So I just wanted to take a moment for that. The second thing that I'd like to say is I recently made an announcement that I'll be teaching astrology classes, and I haven't quite decided the exact details of that because I'm just wanting to get a feel for the people that are interested, and specifically first of all, where they live on the planet, because I live in Australia. So I have to coordinate a time that is going to work for me and work for people who join the class. And so I've decided that I'll probably do a different class for people based in Europe and a different class for people based in the USA, because I think that's going to work better. So if you do email me expressing interest in classes, please tell me where you are from so I can start to create a list and work out what I'm going to do. And thank you to those of you who have already expressed interest. And I have got you in mind. I have noted your names and your emails. And I'm just starting to create a list and you know, just work out details as each day goes by. I'm hoping to start probably the first class in around about 2 weeks' time, I would think. The classes at this point are not necessarily going to be some kind of curriculum, you know, or sequential order of starting from A to Z. That there's going to be many different subjects covered many different levels of astrology. I just need first to ascertain people's level of understanding of astrology, so I know what I'm pitching to whom. You know, if you are just starting out in astrology, then if I'm doing intermediate classes, which I will be doing, you know, you'll just find that you're basically just getting lost. So I need to work out the beginners group and the more intermediate group, so I know what material to bring that will be useful for you guys, right? So anyway, that was just another thing that I wanted to just highlight. Okay, so let's talk about the full moon in Taurus, which is forming a conjunction to the awesome planet Uranus. In Taurus, of course, the conjunction is like 2 or 3 minutes apart. So it's a very, very tight conjunction. A conjunction means two planets being side by side together. I'll bring up the chart in a moment and you'll see. The opposition to the sun in Scorpio, that's what a full moon is. It's always the sun and the moon opposite each other. Most of you are aware of that. Some of you may not be. So I kind of like to try and not assume that everybody knows everything I'm talking about. So I'd like to make some small explanations where it's necessary. So the sun and moon are opposite each other. The sun's in Scorpio, the moon's in Taurus. That produces a full moon. Uranus is right next to the sun, right next to the moon. And the sun has the goddess asteroid Juno right there, the goddess asteroid Urania, and the goddess asteroid Astria. And so I feel this is a very special feminine vibration frequency of the goddesses that's pouring through this full moon. Before I talk about some of those features, what I want to just remind people of is, first of all, have a look at where this full moon is in your birth chart. What time is it? Okay. Because the full moon is going to light up that area of life for you, that sector of life. That's where things light up. Full moon is always lighting things up. It's illumination. It's ultimately crystallization, awareness, consciousness, insight, seeing clearly, right? It's the full moon is the same. You could say it's the same description as the archetype of Libra. Okay, it's literally two planets or two bodies or 2 points opposite each other. Okay, so when you are looking at where this full moon is in your chart, have a look at whether it makes any conjunctions or oppositions to planet in your birth chart. So where is Taurus in your birth chart? You may have some planets in Taurus, which means it could mean that the full moon is conjunct those planets, which is going to draw in more of a narrative and an experience for you relative to the full moon. Also, if you have planets opposite the full moon, meaning you've got planets in Scorpio, then the full moon is opposite those planets. And once again, it's bringing in the energy of those planets in your birth chart, and they too are being activated during this time. That's the first thing. The other thing that I wanted to say, which you hardly ever hear, but I want to say it because I think it's really important, is that in my experience over many, many years of working with astrology, working with my own chart, working with clients, I used to teach 20 years ago, by the way. So teaching in a few weeks' time is not a first time thing for me. I did that 20 years ago. Okay. So I've worked with a lot of different people through the years. When it comes to looking at what's happening in your birth chart, you can have at any given time, you know, a multitude of transits going on. Okay. And all of us do. Does it mean that every single transit is going to be, you know, absolutely essential and important for you? Is it going to be activated 100%? And the answer is no. Okay. And it's important to know that because there's two things to understand about that. The first thing is that timing is of the essence in our whole evolutionary process and journey through life. So there are many different layers to that, but let's bring it right down here to the immediate moment right now. Whatever is going on in your life right now can be reflected through what is being activated through your birth chart. All the transits and progressions and things that are going on, are they all activating everything in your consciousness in your life right now? No, they won't be, because when you have really specific turning points in life, or really important events taking place, really important shifts or crises, or opportunities for growth and expansion, there's usually a layer of things that are actually being activated in your chart, number one. And number two, it's also about your level of awareness and alignment to those frequencies and those energies. In my opinion, when people have a transit by Pluto, it's with Pluto especially, it seems to be inevitable that there will be something quite powerful that the individual will experience in their life. Okay, I think Pluto is probably the main exception. Sometimes people can have, a Uranus opposition, which happens between the ages of 41 to 43, around there, which is known in the consensus reality as the midlife crisis, for instance. And I have known people who have had the Uranus opposition at midlife, and their life hasn't been in crisis. Their life hasn't fallen apart. And so I'm sharing this with you because there are many instances where we may not respond to certain transits that are going on. And the reason for that is because, number one, if we are not in tune with that energy, it can just kind of bypass us in certain ways. The other reason is because there is a very specific timing of the soul where it's seeking to have certain experiences, and that very specific timing is reflected by a number of layers of things going on in your birth chart. So it's just, I think that's a really valid point to really kind of reflect on, because you can just find yourself, especially as a beginner in astrology or even as an intermediate person, if you are looking at every single possible transit and aspect of things that are going on relative to your chart, the only thing that you will discover is that you're lost. It can just be so mentally overwhelming, so overwhelming for the linear brain, which is trying to basically classify and identify and frame every single detail of every single thing that's going on. And yeah, you may be able to identify it from the point of view of, Jupiter is forming a square to my Venus, or Mercury is forming a square to my Mars, or transiting Mars is, opposing my Venus, and et cetera. And you may have those transits, and it's very possible that nothing much happens, because the timing of other things have not been activated at the same time as that transit is activating something in your chart. So here's an example. And I will teach this actually in my classes, because it's a very powerful tool to have in your understanding to navigate your way through what's happening in your life at any given moment. So there's something called perfected houses, which is an old astrological technique, and it in short, it shows us each year in our life we're in a particular house of the birth chart, and the ruler to that house becomes the Lord ruler of the year, for instance. Now, when we're using that system, I am, and most other people are using what's called whole sign houses. Okay, so you can use that system. Let's just say that you were in the first house, okay, because your 24 years of age, or you're, let's just say 24 years of age. So you've just stepped into the first house. What is the sign on the ascendant? What planets are in the first house? What rules the ascendant? And then you'd need to look at, are there any transits to those planets in your first house? Are there any transits to the ruler of that house? And is the ruler of that house making any other significant transits? And you would look at that in conjunction with your actual normal natal chart. So say you use the Pori house system, or a Placidus, or I use Koch, for instance. When I'm looking at a person's birth chart, I look at their chart from the whole sign houses, and I look at it from the Koch house system, because when you're using the whole sign house system, planets can move into the previous or the subsequent house, for example. And so you get a very different view of your chart. They're both valid. Both those charts are valid. And the point being is that when you've got a first house activated from this birthday to next birthday, that's going to describe, very simply put, the everyday circumstances and dynamics of your life. And then the transits that are happening to your normal natal chart, for instance, will possibly correspond with that in some kind of way. And if they do, then it really enhances what's happening in this particular year for you relative to being in your perfected first house. This is just one example, but a very powerful example relative to learning how to hone in more on what's really being timed at the moment in your life relative to what's important. Because like I said, I'll just let this police go by. There's literally so many transits going on at any given moment, right? For all of us. And like I said, if you don't have some kind of focus and know how to kind of zoom in and identify the layers that are actually being activated at the moment, the only thing you'll discover is that you've got all this information. This planet is transiting this point. This planet is, this planet is transiting Venus. This planet is transiting, etc., etc., etc. And you are just left with a whole bunch of information, which is Gemini, that has no meaning. The meaning part is Sagittarius. So again, just to make it clear, when you're looking at your own birth chart, and this is relevant to this full moon at the moment, okay? Because let's just take the full moon, for instance. We have a full moon every month. We have a new moon every month. We have 8 phases through the month. Now, the full moon and the new moon are the most popular, videos, or most popular topics relative to the moon cycle, because there's a new cycle beginning. When we get to the halfway point, 2 weeks later, we have this experience of illumination, or seeing what we've planted. What seeds did we plant at the beginning of that new moon, for instance? And you can go through the month where, if you're not tuned into the new moon or the full moon, you can go through the month with really just not noticing much at all. However, if that full moon is activating certain things in your chart, which also correspond to some very specific transits, for example, and then perhaps your perfected house, and we can add progressions to that as well, that's when you start seeing a very specific theme. It's not scattered anymore. It's not just disjointed information. It becomes this holistic view, if you like, a bigger picture view of layers of things that are being activated at a very specific time. I mean, the moon acts as a timer as well. It's a timer to set things off. So the moon is a smaller sort of, looking through into your chart, because the full moon in Taurus conjunct Uranus, it's not going to change your life. Let's be realistic. You know, I see a lot of videos on YouTube, and I just notice, you know, the headings of them, you know, relative to full moon, new moon, and you know, I see some headings that, you know, can be very misleading in my opinion, because the claims that are made are, you know, the biggest karmic change of your life, and this is the biggest, you know, full moon, and it's going to, you know, have these, you know, massive sort of consequences and impacts, and in all honesty, that's not going to be true for everyone. And I find that a little bit frustrating when I notice that, because it misleads people into having some sort of a false hope or misdirected information. So if you are serious about working with your life through an astrological lens, these are very important points to learn, to integrate into your knowledge and learning of astrology. Otherwise, it remains at the Gemini level, which is just all this scattered information. And whilst you may be able to classify it, you know, Mercury is square Mars, Venus is opposite, you know, whatever. What does that actually mean for you? Does it mean anything for you? Is it actually activating things for you? This is, you know, this is how we need to be realistic. I'm very realistic when it comes to how I work with astrology. You know, I have a strong Piscean component and Sagittarian component in my chart, which really activates my intuition. So I employ my intuition very strongly, but I remain very, very grounded with the matters that I discuss, whether it's through a video like now or whether it's through working with a particular individual. It's just totally useless to bring information to people that might just sound, you know, absolutely fantastic. But what does it actually mean? Does it actually connect with them? You know, so these are important things. And also, just finally, before I keep going on here and I lose sight of this video, it is also about what we are tuned into. You know, at the moment, this full moon has these oppositions to these three goddesses. Are those three goddesses going to activate extraordinary material in every single person's life? Of course not. And to think that and believe that is really naive and unrealistic. However, if you are the sort of person that works with your birth chart, works with astrology, is at a point at this time that is seeking to further develop and evolve and deepen your understanding of astrology, because Urania is the asteroid of astrology. She's the goddess of astrology. Uranus, which is conjunct this full moon, is another planet that you could say rules astrology. Before Uranus was discovered, it was Mercury that was the ruler of astrology. So Mercury is very special as well, very powerful relative to our learning of astrology. But this full moon is so tied into a planet and an asteroid, both of which that correspond to the understanding of the stars, of the cosmos, of planetary energies, of frequencies, of wisdom. So for those that are not working on that level and not interested in astrology and not, you know, studying it, not learning it, not observing it and so forth, then, you know, that full moon's not going to activate those things in their life. It's kind of logical as well. However, the Uranus being conjunct the full moon, just from the point of view of what it symbolizes just as a conjunction alone, you know, I mean, the moon in Taurus is exalted. That's its exalted position, okay? Every planet has some kind of dignity or debility or is neutrally placed, right? I don't know if you guys understand that. Some of you do, some of you don't. Perhaps those are things I can teach in my classes as well for those of you that don't. It is important to understand why a planet is dignified in a certain sign and why it's debilitated in another sign. Those levels of astrology are a very core, central, foundational building block level of understanding, okay, the meaning of planets in signs and so forth. So the moon in Taurus is an exalted position. So the moon in Taurus, in other words, is very powerful. It's a very stable moon. If you are born with moon in Taurus, you have this ability to really be, generally speaking, this is not, we'd need to assess the whole chart, of course, but just generally in very basic terms, moon in Taurus is a very emotionally stable individual, okay, which is a really powerful trait and quality to have, because life throws so many curveballs our way, and there are a lot of things that can happen to us that can destabilize us emotionally, and we can just get thrown left, right, and center, right? So when you have a moon in Taurus, there's a sense of being really emotionally grounded and stable and being able to deal with the crises and the curveballs that show up. But in this full moon story, we have the full moon conjunct Uranus. So we have a very strong fixed energy. Taurus is a fixed sign, the moon in Taurus, Uranus in Taurus. The sun in Scorpio, that's another fixed sign. One is water, one is earth. So we have this opposition polarity, sun and the moon, and it's you could say they're each other's shadow. The shadow component of Taurus Scorpio is one of the most interesting to me. And when people have the Scorpio Taurus polarity emphasized quite strongly in their chart, this shadow of Scorpio Taurus plays in quite powerful ways, because Taurus is fundamentally about survival and security. And when Scorpio is its shadow, which it is, it can produce the fear and the paranoia of the Scorpio, the darker side of life. I need to hang on to absolutely everything and do whatever it is I need to do to hold on to these things, Taurus attachment, because that guy over there, he wants everything I have. So I've got to be very careful. That's the paranoia of the shadow of Scorpio. That's another sort of layer and level. But we are dealing with a full moon in fixed energy, and fixed energy at its best is the ability to stand with something, the ability to persevere with something, the ability to stay with something long enough to endure the journey, even though you may not be able to see the reward and benefit right now. On the other hand, the fixed energy can also keep us fixed, locked in to a certain belief or a certain path or choices or mindsets that keep us locked into a more stagnant position relative to our own growth and evolution. So fixed can be so fixed to the level of it's immovable. You just cannot move the fixed signs very easily, particularly Taurus. Taurus is not going to be moved and pushed by anything or anybody. Scorpio is different because Scorpio seeks to let go and die and be rebirthed and, give birth to new things and transform and, shed its old skin and so on and so forth, right? So the moon in Taurus conjunct Uranus is a really powerful conjunction, because whilst the moon in Taurus is seeking to be grounded and stable, the presence of Uranus there is stimulating perhaps the desire to want some emotional freedom. Uranus is always about the how do we decondition? Saturn is conditioning, Uranus is deconditioning. So what kind of emotional attachments, patterns of behavior do we have in place that are very fixed sort of attitudes that could benefit from the presence of Uranus there during this full moon, where we can tap into a greater sense of freedom and liberation, and also, more importantly, our own authenticity, because Uranus corresponds to being authentic. The moon in Taurus wants to hang on. Uranus wants to create a sense of separation or freedom. So when you bring that in opposition to the Sun and Juno, Juno is the goddess of commitment. She was the wife of Zeus. She corresponds to marriage, if you like, commitment, justice, fairness, equality, lots of other things. But her placement there, right there with the Sun and being opposite the moon, because it's an opposition, and oppositions, well, I want to read you something, because this is just a really clear, succinct way of putting it. First of all, Moon Uranus, the combination: emotional need for freedom, need for unusual emotional experiences, sudden actions dictated by feeling outbursts of emotion, disruptions of old patterns of living. Why? Because the moon corresponds to, our home environment, the way we live, right? Breaks with the past. Moon corresponds to the past. Uranus corresponds to breaking free, right? And disruptions in nurture, because disruptions correspond to Uranus and nurture corresponds to the moon. So the moon is not very comfortable, okay, with Uranus there right next to it, especially in Taurus, where it's wanting to hang on to some sense of feeling stable, okay? On the other hand, there are a lot of people that are seeking to express a greater sense of emotional freedom within themselves relative to where they are at the moment in life, right? And the opposition, this is just a really beautiful, simple way of describing an opposition. You can think about this with any opposition, any two planets, any 2 points, any 2 asteroids, okay? So analogous to the 7th house, polarity, strife and conflict, but also partnership, cooperation and consciousness. Conflicts develop when unrecognized parts of the self are projected. Energy and growth in consciousness results when the projected parts are recognized and integrated. So hence, an opposition is typically arises in a person's life as it's a polarized force. So it can typically rise as conflict, polarity, competition, this versus that, until we realize that what we're seeing out there in that person or that situation is somehow something that belongs to our own psyche, but we just haven't integrated it. And so this is the beauty of full moons as well. It enables us to experience, step into some further integration relative to our own journey at the moment. So Juno opposite the moon, because it's an opposition, it does represent some kind of conflict. And the conflict in moon opposite Jupiter would be around my needs, moon, versus my partner's needs. And there's conflict there because I may feel that by taking care of my partner's needs on this matter and that matter and that matter, I'm actually neglecting my own needs in this way, in this way, in this way. So it's the trying to find the balance between my needs, my partner's needs, and not it being my needs versus his or her needs, but rather it being balanced, equal partnership experience where both people are feeling heard, understood, appreciated, accepted, loved, and so forth, right? So Juno opposite this full moon is going to probably stimulate some matters around that for certain couples, okay, depending on where that full moon lands in your chart and if there are other things activating it as well. Let me just, I forgot to bring up the chart. Let me just do that now. And we can just look at it together. So this is the chart for the full moon, which is just done for Melbourne, Australia. For us here in Australia, it will be the 1st of November. For most of you, it will be the 31st of October, right? So there's the full moon. Well, there's the moon in Taurus. Let me get my little helper. Yeah, let's see. Oops. What is that doing? There we go. Oh, I've just drawn it around. Okay, so I've just highlighted Uranus in Taurus, the moon in Taurus, and there's, of course, Black Moon Lilith in Taurus. So she's speaking to this as well. So there's, there's just an incredible level of feminine. I'm just trying to move this. You guys can't see it, but I can, and it's annoying me. There we go. There's a strong presence with this full moon relative to the goddess energy. We've got Lilith in Taurus, Juno in Scorpio, and you can't see them, but just imagine transiting Urania and transiting Astraea are both at 6 degrees of Scorpio. Okay, so they're just right next to the sun, basically, only 2 degrees away, in fact. So, this just can be looked at as, for those of you that are wanting to tune into wisdom, deeper insights and knowledge and understanding about astrology, about your own chart, about your own life, about the studying that you may be doing around astrology. Well, these goddesses are providing a gift, you could say, because they're literally standing there with this full moon, opposite the full moon, conjunct the sun, opening their vibration, their frequency, and saying, tune into what I have to offer. And it is in Scorpio, so it is about going into deeper components within yourself that doesn't necessarily have to do with your left linear brain. In fact, it doesn't. You've got to sometimes step into those layers within you, which would correlate to the soul, Scorpio, the deeper components within you, where there is no language, where there are no words. You don't need to have words around everything all the time. It's sometimes when we're invited into this space, especially through the archetype of Scorpio, we're invited to go in and explore and experience through the soul level and through our deepest feelings. The soul doesn't have a vocabulary. It doesn't have language. The soul is about feeling our way into or through any experience. The language that subsequently arises, which is the left brain, linear brain, trying to frame things or create a narrative relative to language, trying to define things, it's just the way the left linear brain works. It wants to kind of connect the dots, as it were, and put some rational sort of thoughts around things. And sometimes, the overthinking about an experience that we feel very deeply, that we embody very deeply, when we try to put language around that, the experience is lost through the words, because the words are not enough to explain the experience of the soul. So sometimes it's just important to have an experience and go through a process where you just allow yourself to feel what's coming up, and not try to identify with it through language, because something gets lost through language in certain instances. So these goddesses, in other words, that are conjunct the sun, because they are in Scorpio, they're really offering a sense of very deep, insightful wisdom relative to the stars, to the cosmos, that we can connect with on a soul level. So this full moon then can be a really prominent time where you can experience a sense of greater understanding and seeing from the space of feeling, from the soul level. That's how I would interpret it, right? And we are talking about goddess Astria and goddess Urania. Urania was she was an astronomer, an astrologer. She was a muse. She's one of the goddesses that belongs to the 9 muses. Very talented, just brilliant. And if you've got the goddess Urania prominent in your birth chart, for example, close to Uranus, close to Mercury, close to Venus, that's going to really correspond with your connection to astrology. And goddess Astria, who became the constellation Virgo, she's the justice card in the tarot deck, for instance. So she corresponds to justice, fairness, equality. She also corresponds to the stars as well. And it was said that she ascended to heaven during the Iron Age on Earth because she was just so mortified and disgusted by human behavior. She just couldn't handle the ugliness of what was happening on Earth, and subsequently she became the constellation Virgo. But she corresponds to learning, purity, justice, knowledge, and she represents the symbols of the stars, and she empowers us to fight for, as it said, the good fight, right? Meaning that there's got to be, when we're fighting for a cause, let's say, well, there's many different ways of looking at that, I suppose. I guess you just need to bring it back to your own self and how that could correspond to you at the moment. Because everyone's got a different point of view or perspective on what cause is just and fair and right, and what cause is a waste of time. So, there's different opinions. So I'll just leave that point out. And it is said that one day she will come back to Earth, and she'll be bringing with her the return of the utopian golden age. So there's something about her presence here with this full moon and Urania, both those goddesses connecting to the stars, that can be very, very powerful in our own personal process and journey of learning more deeply about our own self and our own birth chart and astrology in general, because these goddesses hold that gift, that vibration. That's what they represent. So think about that and how that could be lighting things up, in your life, wherever that full moon is in your own birth chart, for instance. The other thing that's really interesting to me is that Venus has ingressed into Libra in this chart, and so Venus is in her own home sign. It's a very powerful place for Libra. But it is forming an inconjunct to the moon in Taurus, and it's an interesting one because Venus rules this full moon, right? Because Venus is the ruler of Taurus. So there is something about our own personal needs, the moon, and also our own personal needs from the point of view of relationships, Venus, and the distinct awareness of what my own needs are and how I'm trying to find them in this relationship through this person. So if we don't find a way to meet our own needs, which is Venus in Taurus, then what we do unconsciously is we project what we feel we need and want onto the other person, onto the relationship, and we expect them to give to us what it is we think we need. And of course, when that doesn't happen, then we're thrown back onto ourselves to work that out, well, I need to figure out what my needs are, and I need to find a way to provide them to myself and not expect the other person to fill that hole, to fill that gap, and to give me those things, because I can't give them to myself, because we can give them to ourselves. And in fact, we need to be able to step back and look at ourselves in that way, because by doing that, obviously we become more aware. We are able to provide for ourselves what it is we need, and therefore attract a healthier, more balanced relationship. Because in most cases, people project all their needs or unconscious stuff onto the other person, good or bad or indifferent, and just expect the other person to give that, to provide that. And when the other person doesn't, then the narrative around that is usually, that person wasn't, they didn't meet my needs, they didn't give me this, they didn't do that, blah, blah, blah. And so does that leave you in a empowered position? It doesn't. It just leaves you in a position where the blame becomes externally. So you just do the same thing again to the next person. Well, that person couldn't do it. That person wasn't good enough. That relationship was crap, whatever. So you go on looking, you find somebody else, and you just project the whole same story again. So until this is the inconjunct between Taurus and Venus, this is one of the core issues that's reflected through the inconjunct of Venus in Libra and Venus in Taurus. It's the ability to recognize what it is we are actually really need and how we can actually provide that for ourselves. So there is something about that theme being highlighted during this full moon, because the moon connects to our own emotional security and needs. Venus connects to our needs and relationship needs and values. And then Juno, another feminine body, connects to what we are prepared to commit to and what we want to commit to. So there are strong bodies here that all speak to personal needs and relationship needs, and the ability to be able to discern when you are just projecting your own stuff onto another person, and when you are making a conscious effort to work on your own self and not sort of expect everything from the other individual. Expectations are a hook to hang your disappointments on. I love that saying, because that's just seems to be very, very true. So that's another theme that's being kicked off here during this full moon. Now, Mercury has ingressed back into Libra, because Mercury went retrograde in Scorpio not that long ago. Again, very interesting, because this year, this is the third retrograde cycle of Mercury in water signs. And in 2019, I only just realized that, or just remembered that we had Mercury retrograde in water signs again. So we've had 6 retrograde cycles of Mercury in the water signs over the last 2 years. Is that a coincidence? I highly doubt it. What does it mean? It means lots of things, and it means lots of different things for different people, and based on where Mercury has been retrograding in your own chart, of course. But just as a general collective, I suppose, perspective, it would correspond to our own mental faculty and processes connecting with much deeper components of our existence, as opposed to just thinking about life on that external level and thinking about information externally. Because in the water signs, water corresponds to the soul. Water takes us in and down always. Whatever planet is in water, it's the process and experience that takes us in and down, whereas air and fire push us out. So anytime you see water, there's an experience and expression and embodiment of the soul's work, the soul's desires, the soul's frequency. And so we could say that the last couple of years on a collective level, we're being asked to perhaps, put some focus into our inner dimensions, because the world, especially the Western world, for a very long time has been so personality dominated and orientated. Everything is external. Everything is projected out there. And the focus has been on what's happening out there and how much have I achieved out there and what are my goals relative to what I'm doing out there. But what about what we are doing in here? There's such a disconnect with the soul and the personality. So when we have an emphasis of a planet going retrograde in water signs, 6 consecutive times, it's a pretty damn clear message that Mercury himself, Hermes himself, is inviting us, assisting us in giving consideration, reflection, depth, and thought into our inner life, our soul life, and how we can perhaps integrate that more with our external life, our personality. So these are the themes that I see as being, on a general level, as being really emphasized with Mercury retrograde through water signs the last 2 years. Now, Mercury ingresses into Libra. This is all happening, a few days before the US elections. So I know there's lots of things going on there. Who knows who's going to win? Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if Trump gets in again. I would not be surprised at all. Anyway, I'm not going to give my personal views and thoughts on that. It's just not relevant. But I think what's going to be really interesting is that this full moon has a Mercury square Saturn in it, right? So there's Saturn. Okay, let's just add Pallas Athena. So Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, Pallas Athena. There's Mercury retrograde. You can see the R, that stands for retrograde. It's gone back. He's gone back into Libra. So there's some very important deliberating that's taking place. And the square to Saturn, it's also square Pluto, but the square to Saturn is likely to be, on a collective external level, it's likely to be a response to decisions that are made from systems and governments that the people will have an opposing view towards. It won't feel balanced or equal, quite possibly. So we'll see how that plays out. What else have we got here? Just see what I've written, if there's anything I... So, with the full moon in Taurus, that there can be disruptions, there can be breakthroughs, there can be shocks. You can have an emotional shock. Somebody can brings something up or triggers something in you that creates an emotional shock. It can be emotional freedom, you know, just very simple, general kind of experiences, I suppose. But to me, I see it on a much deeper level, on an evolutionary level. It is about deconditioning perhaps emotional attachments that we have that that keep us stagnant, because it is evident, whether we believe in astrology or not, it is evident that the world is shifting. There's a crisis, and there are lots of things dying off, and there are new timelines being born, new cycles being born. The Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Aquarius at the end of this year, which I will speak about separately, is a very significant cycle. Of course, the Pluto Saturn cycle has been a part of this. Pluto Jupiter, those three cycles that have happened this year and from last year are directly correspond to the changes that we are seeing. The resistances, and I said this a couple of years ago when I spoke about Saturn in Capricorn or Saturn Pluto conjunction. I spoke about maybe a year ago or something like that. It's the collective resistance to the nature of reality as people have identified with it thus far. And life is changing, reality is changing, because there's this thing called evolution. And there's this thing in humans called old habits die hard, creatures of habit, attachment, fear, insecurity, anxiety of the unknown. And we are stepping into the unknown. No one knows what the future is going to look like in 5-10 years. No one. Not that I know of. If you know somebody, feel free to ask them to share some thoughts. I'd love to know what their perspective is. But what we do know in no uncertain terms is that there is a new reality being born, and there is some people have defined it as a spiritual war with the light forces and the dark forces. And, you can subscribe to that or you can deny that. It's entirely up to you. I do get the sense that there is something there. Well, without question, there is something bigger at play here. And this is an important point, actually, because the change is going to take place, whether we like it or not. What we are seeing at the moment from the 3D lens, is really uncomfortable, not pleasant. It's totally Saturn Pluto from the 3D lens. It's the Saturn level of when we view reality from the consensus level, which is Saturn, and we're just in touch with that. What we experience and see outside of ourselves is just the restrictions, the lockdowns, all the things that have been going on all this year that most people have had an opposition to, right? And which I completely understand. But if we just continuously stay at that level, not only do we disempower ourselves, but we're not connecting to the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that this reality is going to change and it is going to be better. It actually is going to be better. But there are some things that need to wrestle, that need to have. There's a battleground of things going on at the moment where certain forces are trying to hold on to certain things. And because of the amount of exposure, and Pluto is what exposes, it exposes everything. So the level of exposure that's taking place is kind of making certain things or people a little bit nervous. So I'm just very careful about what I say here. So I want to try to just keep it in astrological terms. Very simply put, the nature of reality is deconstructing. And if you can find the way within your own self to tune into the higher level of what's going to come, which is going to be more fair, more equal, more balanced, there'll be more beauty, there'll be more harmony, that these things are coming. Even the Venus star point, you know, she's going to change out of Scorpio into Libra. That's going to be a big, 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 big deal. I mean, it's the Venus Scorpio point has been in play for, it'll be like 100 years by the time she gets into Libra, which is only a few years away. So, you know, we're moving out of a Venus star Scorpio, a 100-year cycle. And what's Scorpio? It's intense, it's crisis, it's death, you know, it's transformations as well, of course, but it's a very intense journey, experience, vibration. You know, when the Venus star goes into Libra for the next 100 years or so, that's going to bring in this, in the ether, in the collective unconscious or collective consciousness, a much more balanced way of living. It has to. That's what she will do. So there are a lot of things going on that will be so much better for our lives moving forward, and our children, our grandchildren, and so forth, and when we actually return, you know. So there are much bigger things in play here. Don't get sidetracked and lost by the bullshit little things that get put out through media and politics and blah blah blah. You know, don't get sidetracked and lost in all of that. All you'll find is that your energy is just going to be drained, your frequency is going to be drained and lowered. You're going to feel more negative, you're going to feel more angry, you're going to feel you know, it becomes this attacking thing, my opinion versus your opinion, and just all this crap. And it's literally a waste of your beautiful energy that you could be using in a much more powerful way for yourself, for the planet, and for everybody else. Always important to remember that. So let's close this up. Full moon in Taurus conjunct Uranus, the release of emotional attachments, emotional freedom, emotional disruption, some matters to be addressed in relationships. My needs, your needs. Where's the balance there? Oh, Vesta in Virgo, I didn't talk about her. I'll have to leave it because it's becoming quite a long video, and perhaps I'll just do a separate, I'll do a separate, either an audio or a video of Vesta in Virgo, because she's going to be in there for quite a few months. And I love the goddess Vesta, and I think in Virgo, she actually rules Virgo, by the way. Well, she rules Virgo and Scorpio. That those two signs are the most closely associated to her myth, her story. So being in Virgo is pretty important, and I'll speak about that another time. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. And yeah, what's there? I just got this book by Mary Blue, series Recovering Your Soul Within Nature. I've had a little look-see, and it looks pretty good to me so far. For those of you that are interested in the asteroid goddesses, this is looking at series from a soul level. So it's very, very different to the material that Demetra George has produced. Demetra George's material is, you know, out of this world, fantastic. But this lady has just taken a very different exploration into series. So if you're interested in that. And as I said, just finally, please email me if you're interested in my classes, which will be happening most likely once a fortnight, or most definitely once a month. I haven't decided that yet. Please let me know if you're from the US or Europe. And also please let me know what your level of astrology is as well. That would be appreciated. That would save me time from having to go back and forth with emails if you can just tell me those three things, right? And yeah, happy full moon in Taurus. And by the way, you know, just expect the unexpected. When it comes to Uranus, you cannot predict what will happen. You can have all the keywords, hypotheses, possibilities, whatever you want to call it. But the truth is, at the end of the day, when you're talking about the frequency of Uranus, it's completely unexpected, unknown, unpredictable. And personally, I find that energy really exciting because Uranus is very strong in my chart and whatever. So yeah, I mean, I love that Uranus energy. But for other people who are, you know, more sort of grounded and have a sense of I've got control over my life, you know, I know what I'm doing today and next week and next month and whatever. Well, once Uranus comes in, it comes in like a tornado, and that plan that you had in play, you can just say bye-bye to it. So the reason I'm mentioning that is because the difficulty with Uranus is when you just resist what's showing up. And like Jeffrey Wolf Green, he says, you know, there's three responses, okay? And the third one is the most typical one that people kind of embrace, if you like. The first response is to completely resist Uranus. We can apply this principle to the full moon. It's the resistance of the unexpected whatever that comes up. And so what do? You just totally resist it. I'm not going there. I'm not having that. Forget about it. That creates all sorts of consequences. There's the experience of completely and utterly embracing the whatever shows up, the uncertainty, the unexpected thing, person, situation, whatever, totally embracing that and going with it. And then the third response is a mixture of both, right? So you have some resistance, but you are open in certain ways as well. And so Jeffrey Wolf Green says that the third one is the most typical way that people sort of respond to Uranus transits. Yeah, so think about that and see how that applies to you. And I will see you guys very soon with more. So thanks again for watching, and I know you're going to make some comments and share some of your own thinking. So thank you for that already. And I'll see you guys very soon. Much love. Enjoy. Happy full moon. Let it be exciting. Let it be unpredictable. Let it shake you up a little bit and bring something really. Uranus rules electricity. It's like that sudden flash, you know, when you see like thunder in the sky, that's a Uranus thing, experience, observation. So yeah, just if you can allow yourself to be open to the unexpected, because you just don't know what that can bring to you for your own ability to be more authentic. Remember, we're all conditioned and we're all fixed in certain ways and we're all stuck in certain ways. And Uranus's aim is to free us from those sorts of things. See you soon, guys. Bye.